going to get into elongated skulls, just a little tantalizer here. When you look at the outline of a human skull to one of these elongated, these are human-like, but they're clearly not human. We'll get into that. So let's start from the spine of the Andes Mountains in southern South America as seen from outer space. And this is really a overview, quite literally, of most of the terrain that I covered. Although you can't see Peru and Bolivia so much, you can see the whole spine of the Andes, and just off screen would be Tierra del Fuego and southern Patagonia, where this journey will end. But as we start zooming in, let's assume we're coming in from outer space to come have a look at some of the mysteries of South America. This is what we might see as we approach on a bright sunny day. And as we get a little closer to the Altiplano of Peru, we'll start to see these geometric lines, which are quite unusual because nature does not create these perfect straight lines, not in megalithic form, not in long, straight right angles as we see here. So as we come in closer to Nazca, this is a collection of the Nazca Plain. And these figures on the Nazca Plain are truly remarkable because they do contain many animals that do not exist around this area of Peru at all. So you'd have to go to different parts of South America to encounter some of these animals, which is really amazing because how did the people of South America have this information? How did they know this? How did they get this? And we're going to get into that a little bit here. Just 1 second. I'm just looking for something that would help me here. Not finding it readily available, so we're going to go on. The most important one I find of these animals is that spider. Right. This is what it would look like from the air. And indeed, people who take a flight over the Nazca line, this is one of the most popular ones they like to go and see. So this is a spider of the genus Riccinuli, and is one of the rarest spiders in the world, found only thousands of miles away in the Amazon rainforest. So this is very remarkable, but what is truly remarkable is that little part of its foot that extends out. Now let me go back and show a little clearer in the, whoops, I guess you can't go back, or can you? Yeah, here we go. So if you look back, you see that little hook on its foot there. That is remarkable because that is the reproduction mechanism of this particular spider, which can only be seen really under a microscope. It's very difficult to detect this tiny little feature on this spider. So the fact that they knew about it to represent it in the Nazca line, build it as this geoglyph on such a massive scale, and know that was a very unique feature of this particular spider, tells you a lot about the intelligence of the pre-contact Nazca people. Now, it should be said that the Nazca region is not very far away from Paracas, Peru. And Paracas, Peru is where there is a museum with elongated skulls. And we'll get into the elongated skulls here in a little bit. But just to let you know, is not too far of a distance between this very high desert plateau, which happens to be one of the driest regions in the world. These geoglyphs, they last for so long. Geoglyphs basically mean an etching into the soil. And we actually have geoglyphs here in North in my book called Sacred Places North America, I visited Blythe, California, which is right along the Colorado River of Arizona. In fact, there's even a geoglyph on the Arizona side and several of human geoglyphs, as well as one of what appears to be a horse, which is very peculiar because horses were introduced to North America by the Spaniards. Here back on Nazca, there are human figures. You can see this little guy seems to be saying, "Hey, what's up, yo?" Seeing me from above. But this also gives some scale to the size of some of these, because you can see the spider here, rather quite large. And it's also interesting on Nazca that you really have to be at an elevation over these Nazca lines to really make out their form. Because when you look at them at ground level, they're just lines that go off into the distance. You can't really make out the shape of the geoglyphs unless you're elevated above. Also on the Nazca Desert area was found Atta. It's a little nickname for this guy. He was in the movie Cirrus by Dr. Stephen Greer a couple years ago, featured in there. And you can see the scale of this guy next to this pair of sunglasses. Really small, tiny. But they did x-rays and examined it. I know Emery Smith was working on this for a while, and they determined that this is a full-grown specimen by its bone structure and excuse me, its internal organs, which could be viewed under a CAT scan and x-rays. So this is something, once again, it's kind of human fetus by the skeptics, but when you look at it, it doesn't look like a fetus, really, hardly at all. And then the fact that this was determined to be full grown should also be an indication that Atta is something very unusual and definitely worth further examination. I was on a panel at Contact in the Desert with Emery Smith, Jimmy Church, that up a couple of years ago, and we were talking about Atta, and information came out that several more of these exact same mummified little human aliens, I want to call them that, were also found on the Chilean Atacama Desert. 12 more, it was said on that. Even be more than that. I would think that the determination of multiple little bodies of Atta here would certainly determine that these are not human. Matching data points are the best way for researchers to come to conclusions that this is something not of this world or not known in this world. And this would be a good way to examine these other little mummies to determine what exactly this is. As we move through Peru to the megalithic city of Cusco, the Puma city, there are many architectural features in a megalithic design. We're going to talk a lot about the megaliths on this presentation, as well as the Inca Road. And just like the saying, all roads lead to Rome in ancient Europe, well, in South America, all Incan roads led to Cusco, the ancient capital itself. And I have to say, in the town of Cusco, this is one of the most fascinating places to visit because there are literally enigmatic megalithic ruins everywhere. When I was there 2 years ago, exactly 2 years ago, I was just meeting up with Nassim Harriman, and Brian Forrester was one of the guest speakers, and we're there with the Resonance Academy 150 delegates. So one of the biggest tour groups I've ever been a part of. And I also took place as a guest speaker from time to time. But I was there just in amazement and awe because I've researched and written about the megaliths of South America, but then to see them with my own eyes, the precision, the marshmallowing out, which you can see here in this image, the little knobs up to the top right. And I will talk about all this in just a little bit, but to see all this with your own eyes, how they're stacked on other megaliths and so perfectly formed around others. And then we would have tour groups right next to ours with a conventional archaeologist telling us that well, I was not telling us, but their group, but I was kind of scooting over to listen in, how they were telling their group that the Inca cut these stones with simple copper tools or bronze chisels and stone hammers. But one thing you'll never see on these megaliths is chisel marks. What you do see are these perfect edges and this rounding effect that was described as marshmallowing, kind of like the marshmallows we eat, how they just kind of puff out. These megaliths do it all over the place. Now, some of them are perfectly smooth and flat and fitted together just as precisely, but the really enigmatic ones are these multi-angled stones. And this one has several angles. We can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. There's another stone on this same wall right in the middle of old Cusco with 12 points. And it just begs a question, why would you go to so much trouble to create these angles? And look at how they're fitted, some of these 3 points, so precisely. Why not just stack a wall? Well, that's exactly what the Spaniards did, as well as the Incans following them. They created that wall you can see right behind Emily here, who is my traveling companion on this trip, and how inferior of the rockwork was, with a comparison next to these great big gigantic megalithic stones bulging out with these little knobs. So strange why that would occur. But the great mind of the Resonance Academy, including Brian Forster and Nassim Haramein, had some fantastic theories about how these stones were created, quarried, transported, and formed, as well as fitted and constructed, which we'll get into. But I'm just trying to give a little overview about the different styles, building styles, how the Incan had a style that we'll examine, how the megalithic stones, our group, we kept calling them pre-Incan. These great big megaliths were pre-Incan design. And of course, the Spanish design was even on the right there. You have like a adobe wall that would crumble in an earthquake, most certainly. But these megaliths have stood the test of time and have survived many earthquakes. Here's one of my favorites, and this is also on the very same building. We walked around on all 4 sides using megalithic fits. Here we go. Points. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 angles on it. Now, doesn't it just seem logical that you would just create a block that size and use that instead of going to all the trouble of making these very unique angles and fits, unless they were doing it to perhaps tell us something, that they had a building design technique that we're still playing catch up and trying to understand. That's what's really remarkable about the megaliths in South America, especially right here in Cusco. These just inexplainable designs with multiple angles and edges, and some of the most unusual ways of putting in little hooks and parts of stone that just seemed like they would break off or were very unrealistic way to create what was essentially a stone wall. Why not be easy on yourself? Unless, of course, they wanted to display the secrets of their building technique hidden in plain sight right there in front of us. Well, here's Nassim Harriman and Brian Forster as we venture up to Sacsayhuaman Park, which is just 3 kilometers above Cusco. Now, Cusco's a city at 11,500 foot elevation. So a lot of people in our group, including Emily and myself, had a couple bouts with elevation, being a little ill from it. And it takes a couple days, and then you do get used to it, but it's still a kind of a shortness of breath thing. But up here at Sacsayhuaman, this is now 13,000 foot elevation. It's above the city. Cusco is in a pretty much a U-shaped valley, and Sacsayhuaman is above it. Some people can hike up to it, and they do, and the ancient Incan and pre-Incan people surely hiked up that way, and there's megaliths all along the way too. But once you get here, and this particular spot, there is a cave right behind Brian Forster, and you go through this serpentine chamber. At some points, it becomes totally pitch dark. So you just have to follow through, and then you get through, come out the other side, and then you're in the park. But all along the way, there's these niches and cuts and staircases and other features. And it seemed to me at the time when we were going through there that this was like an initiation, that you were stepping from the light into the darkness, like the mother's womb. You come out the other side and you're reborn, and then you're in the very sacred place of Sacsayhuaman. And all of us were given one of these art crystals to wear, and that's indeed what I was digging around for. I think I got it right here. My own art crystal that I keep and wear. And that's a big 64 art crystal. Now, these are created synthetically. These are created in a laboratory that Nassim has in Southern California. But they are used in such a way that they can give the wearer a certain kind of energy, power, protection that only a sacred geometry crystal creates. So he has this one with 64 units in it, and we would take it everywhere and put it there and do our group meditations. And but now you can see the main wall at Sacsayhuaman, this incredible megalithic wall on several levels. There are steps going up, and some of these blocks, here's one for example, 30 feet tall. Just amazing. Look at the size of the people here close up to this one. You can just see how incredible these blocks are and how they're all fitted together and weigh many, many tons. Look at that giant one there. Just amazing. When you get up close to these things, it's flooring how difficult it must have been to have created it. And within the pattern of the rocks, there is a puma, there is the serpent, and there is the condor. And those are the 3 animals that were sacred to not only the Incan, but we believe the pre-Incan people who were the real constructors of this incredible megalithic area where rituals took place and continue to take place to this day. See off here in the distance, you can see a little of Cusco up on the hillside, and that's it down below there. And we spent a half day here and it just didn't seem enough. It's just so incredible. So as Brian was taking us around, showing us other motifs, here again is the serpent. And this is also represented at Lake Titicaca. So you see these three animals represented quite frequently. Now, the one that Brian has his hands on, this one's quite amazing because it was so precisely cut. It's like you could roll a marble down the groove there. It was so perfectly uniform with no cut marks. I shouldn't even use that word because it was almost like they melted the stone and created that groove right through there. It was so precise, so perfectly even as far as the edges go. Of course, it's a serpentine shape showing the serpent, just like here on one of the stone towers off the coast of Lake Titicaca, which we'll visit a little bit later. And this is that same site, Chinchero, with the serpent that Brian was on. And this was a common theme that we would do. We'd have a meditation, oftentimes standing against or at the walls. There's Nassim and Brian doing a little demo and shooting some video. And we got some great weather, so that was good. This time of year it could rain a bit, but we got it without a whole lot of interruption with the weather. So these megalithic building techniques, which you see in many different locations, still cannot be replicated on the scale and the grandeur and the size of these megaliths to this day. Therefore, it's worth examining different ideas about how they were made, constructed, transported, and then placed into shape. In the city of Cusco, she wants 5 soles. That's the Peruvian currency to take a picture. I think my friend gave it to her. But you can see behind her, there's just so many megalithic walls in Cusco that after a while you just stop taking notice. And you look at the more unusual things like the llama and the clothing of the indigenous woman here. And there are a lot of indigenous people in Peru and Bolivia that still wear their traditional clothing, which I think is great. I'm very happy that there's a resurgence in cultural pride, and they don't want to look like us, and they do use the traditional garb, not just this lady who's asking money to be photographed, but we saw them way off in the countryside herding llamas and as colorful as she is. So that part is refreshing. This is a megalithic site that's a bit unusual, called Moray. It has 3 of these circular terraces. This one featured here is the best preserved. Throughout all of Moray, you have these steps that come down, and they still do large gatherings and rituals, even though this is up at 13,000 foot elevation as well. It was called a place where they would do experiments growing potatoes. And potatoes are from South America. They were the staple food of the Incan, the pre-Incan, and even the people today. There are many different varieties and species of potatoes that exist in South America. Now, of course, they've been exported to the rest of the world and have become a staple food elsewhere. We're most familiar with the russet potato that goes into French fries and so forth. But you have the sweet potatoes, you've got many different colored potatoes. And what we learned at this site, and this is why the explanation for what Moray is doesn't make all that much sense, is that if this was a laboratory for growing potatoes, Well, it would only be potatoes that grow at 13,000-foot elevation, where it is known that potatoes grow at all elevations clear down to sea level. And they're different in texture, they're different in color, they're different in shape, and they're different in taste. So really, this moray 13,000-foot elevation. But what we found was when chanting doing homes in the middle of the circles, there was a perfect resonance of, and I've been to some of the amphitheaters in ancient Greece and ancient Rome, and stuff, perfect auditive ambience to them, so that a speaker on the stage at a amphitheater would be able to project its voice to the people high up in the stands. Of course, back then, so the human voice had to be projected, and to use the actual theater do that to help amplify the voice was exactly what we found to be here at, because the acoustics were perfect. And these celebrations occur to this day, often accompanied by spoken. So this was one of the first places we thought, hey, it doesn't really add up what the archaeologists are telling us. This combined with our own meditation here in oming, that something else was quite different. And moved to agua calientes, which means water hot, or hot springs in the town. This is a fairly new town built for the tourism trade as the gateway to Machu Picchu. With the women wearing the traditional garb, you can see in these statues here, there's a new insurgency of pride. And a lot of these of Incan rulers and other mythical figures, this culture was largely stamped out. We did not want to have these rulers or icons or cultural identity, the Peruvian, Incan people, any kind of false sense of pride. Well, this is all because they definitely deserve to hold their place in history. Road coming up to Machu Picchu, there was talk of doing a gondola from the bottom of the valley. And there is still an old Inca trail that you can hike up or down. And some people in our group did the downward hike. And below there is the river valley where the Spanish went up and down for hundreds of years, but they have Machu Picchu. That was a archaeologist from an American university who covered Machu Picchu by following the Inca Trail. And the way he came in was right out here. There he saw it. First Westerner to gaze down upon the great city of Machu Picchu. Site in South America, they get about 1.5 million visitors a year, although I think those numbers would be way down this year because of Brian Forrester said when he first started coming here about 25 years ago, you could walk anywhere, you could go up and down the terraces, you can go in. Now they keep you on these very set trails. and you cannot deviate. You just have to basically follow. But still, let's see, and highly recommended place to visit. This is what it would look like for Hiram Bingham, who 109 years ago, right there where Nassim is, gazing upon this lost city of the Incans lived here too. They adapted to many of these sites. They would have added some features, and I'll show you some Incan construction. Of course, these thatched roofs and all the wooden beams, by the time from bigger to something special. That this site was chosen because Citadel very invaded, but there's something was chosen was because of that profile in the rock. This is an enhanced view of the face in the mountain. Go back, now you see it. Make it a very sacred site, including this is the which has windows that directly align with the winter solstices. They shine right through the window, and that could not be a coincidence. So the build of archaeoastronomy, and they constructed their buildings around them.